Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, I have a message for conservatives. You're kind of right about the FBI. Look, we have yet to receive very much information about the contents of the FBI's warrant to search Mar-a-Lago or whether it was politically motivated. But concerns that state police agencies could be weaponized against vulnerable parties for political reasons, it's a well-founded one. The left has been warning about this for a very long time, as establishment liberals and conservatives alike have a long and sordid history of using the agency power of the deep state to disrupt organic social movements, murder revolutionary leaders, and disrupt American citizens exercising their right to organize politically within grassroots organizations. My only quibble with conservatives is this: I just hope you're as concerned about these issues and skeptical of these law enforcement agencies when less powerful people are at issue, especially when less powerful people are at issue. In fact, when you look at history, this Trump raid is just the tip of the iceberg. The FBI wiretapped Martin Luther King's phone calls, tried to blackmail him by disclosing his extramarital affairs, and sent him an anonymous letter suggesting that he kill himself. After making his I Have a Dream speech, the FBI domestic intelligence chief wrote a memo saying, quote, "We must mark him now, if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous Negro in the future of this nation." FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was apparently terrified Dr. King would align himself with the Communist Party, something that, of course, was well within Dr. King's rights to do as a free American citizen, but which was made all but illegal under the authoritarian anti-speech witch hunts of the 1950s and 60s. Perhaps you caught that Hollywood has even given silver screen treatment to 2 instances of fascistic authoritarian FBI activity in just the last few years. Judas and the Black Messiah followed the story of how the FBI infiltrated the Black Panthers with a counterintelligence officer, drugged activist Fred Hampton, and extrajudicially murdered him with the help of the Chicago Police Department. Law enforcement sprayed over 90 gunshots through the residential apartment. Of the raid, FBI Special Agent Greg York later said, quote, "We expected about 20 Panthers to be in the apartment when the police raided the place. Only 2 of those Black MFers were killed." J. Edgar Hoover was also tracking Elvis Presley. Intelligence files show the state considered Elvis a definite danger to the security of the United States because of his ability to, quote, arouse the sexual passions of teenage youth. The FBI also maintained files on Frank Sinatra, Jane Fonda, Groucho Marx, Bob Dylan, Michael Jackson, and others guilty of such insidious proclivities as race mixing, condemning establishment politics, and critiquing the massively unequal distribution of wealth it protects. And you're not safe just because you're anonymous. A 37-year-old wiretapping and civil liberties report conducted by Congress found that the FBI were surveilling American citizens. And just this past July, an elderly American activist and member of the African People's Socialist Party had his home raided by the FBI. He was zip-tied and asked to sit on the curb like a criminal before being named as an unindicted co-conspirator in a, quote, Russian plot to undermine democracy.
Are you an agent of Russia?
Please. I mean, it's a really insulting question.
Yeshitela is a lifelong activist and is the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. And now, in the eyes of the US government, he is an unindicted co-conspirator in a Russian plot to undermine American democracy.
And he put a zip tie on my wrist, and they wanted me to sit on the curb.
He has not been charged, but his home here in St. Louis was raided by the FBI in late July.
Some people see it as a badge of honor to be attacked by the United States government when you're involved in the struggle for freedom. It's attacked every struggle for freedom. Mandela was a terrorist. Martin Luther King was spied on.
The Justice Department alleges Yinoff funded a campaign run by Yeshitela's group in 2016.
I can't even entertain a discussion seriously about Russian interference or something. I'm an agent of Russia. I've been doing this all my life, and I've been doing it all my life because of America, not Russia. Before I ever met a Russian, this is what I was doing.
Russia, Russia, Russia. Where have we heard that before? Here's a fun fact. Later in that CNN segment, the journalist alludes to the fact that President Reagan accused anti-nuclear protesters of being infiltrated by Russians, as though Russian involvement changes the obvious calculus that denuclearization and ending the Cold War was a good thing. So, by the way, is international solidarity between working people. That's a good thing. But this is what they do. Everything contrary to the interest of the establishment is Russian disinformation. They did this during the McCarthy era. They did this during the Civil Rights Movement. They did this to Bernie Sanders after his big establishment-threatening Nevada win. And they won't stop doing it until voters stand up. And this is an important point for conservatives who are maybe just now waking up to the danger presented by the deep state, and liberals who might be quick to dismiss it. Counterintelligence operations, or COINTELPRO, has had a specific target over the years. Yes, Trump has been implicated, but historically, the vast majority of those targeted have been on the left, because I would argue that's where the real populist threat actually lies. FBI records show that 85% of COINTELPRO resources targeted such subversive groups as communist and socialist organizations, civil rights organizations, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the NAACP, the Black Panther Party, the American Indian Movement, Vietnam War protesters, the National Lawyers Guild, women's rights movements, Puerto Rican independence movements, and United Ireland. A mere 15% of the FBI's energy went toward far-right targets, like the Ku Klux Klan. Your tax dollars at work, ladies and gentlemen. Your government has been spending 85% of its surveillance dollars making sure that Martin Luther King was killed before he could successfully launch his Poor People's Movement, while only 15% was focused on actual white supremacists. That tells you everything you need to know about who the government fears and where the people's power lies. And it's not necessarily on the right. It's with movements that are poised to return power to you, not protect the status quo. Now, none of this has to be this way. Like so many authoritarian government agencies, this one is relatively new. The FBI was founded in 1935 and, perhaps not so coincidentally, was founded at the peak of American labor power and union organizing, a time when left-wing organizations like the Communist Party were so powerful and were able to exert such influence on the population that FDR was forced to pass sweeping social programs in the form of the New Deal in order to appease movements that wanted much, much more. It's because of communists that we got the 40-hour work week, minimum wage laws, child labor laws, and more. Those were compromises, the compromise position. Hoover was the first FBI director, and he reigned for 37 years until his death. And during that time, he abused his power, violating the laws the FBI was ostensibly established to enforce. The FBI harassed political dissidents, blackmailed high-level politicians, and used its power to advance its own anti-democratic political goals. I'd argue that almost 100 years of that behavior is enough. Now, despite the FBI being obviously bad, conservatives have historically defended it due to the socially conservative base that defended the Vietnam War, and which took every opportunity to hippie punch and derail the equality movement that threatened the status quo. The right also celebrated the FBI as it investigated Hillary Clinton for her emails. Let's not forget that. Listen to how different Trump sounded when the FBI's actions were more convenient to him.
The FBI has just sent a letter to Congress informing them that they have discovered new emails pertaining to the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's investigation. And they are reopening the case into her criminal and illegal conduct that threatens the security of the United States of America.
Now, more recently, the liberal establishment has decided it agrees with 2016 Donald Trump, that the FBI is good, actually, because it has been critical of Donald Trump. But let's be very clear. The FBI is bad, actually. And liberals, just because Marjorie Taylor Greene agrees with you on this, doesn't make that fact untrue. Marjorie Taylor Greene has become America's favorite broken clock. And it's that time of day where she's regretfully 100% right. Now, I don't take her critique in good faith. I don't expect her to keep this up when a candidate of her liking is in control of the deep state. But you should. Her hypocrisy doesn't have to be the hypocrisy of the average conservative voter. Remember, the FBI is an organization that told MLK to kill himself while failing to investigate Emmett Till's murder. It called off the investigation of the white supremacist church bombing that resulted in 4 little girls being murdered in their place of worship, and spends resources instead surveilling Muhammad Ali and raiding the homes of elderly civil rights activists. The FBI is bad precisely because it has always been a political weapon. And if it turns out it's being weaponized against Trump, that is a real problem. But it would also be one of the only times the FBI has gone after people with the power to actually defend themselves. Let's keep this abolish the FBI energy up the next time they come after normal Americans too. People who aren't billionaires. People like you and the folks that you love.
Yeah, we're on the same page here. Like I've said a couple times now, I wish the Republican outrage about the FBI's behavior and just law enforcement in general, let's keep that momentum going. Let's actually reform it, because they have harassed more than just Donald Trump. They've harassed people you've mentioned, and then countless other people whose names are not important or famous names who we don't know of, which is true generally of law enforcement in general, right? The grandmother whose door was broken into in the middle of the night by a SWAT raid that had the wrong address, all of that kind of stuff that goes on routinely, not FBI, but local law enforcement.
Well, they often work with law enforcement, as they did in the case of Fred Hampton in the Chicago Police Department.
And in cases where you want law enforcement to be doing something, in so many of these mass shooting incidents, there was reason for the FBI or for law enforcement to know something. People inform them about, hey, this person is really dangerous. They're stockpiling weapons. They say crazy things online. They have actually made violent threats. They put a gun to a family member's head.
Yeah.
Visit their house and do something. And maybe they visit. Maybe they do something. They don't.
Well,
they
look
don't
at
do
the
enough.
distribution of resources. Look, this might seem overly cynical, but it really does feel to me, when you look at how the FBI was established, when it was established, and what it has devoted the majority of its resources to, it is not an anti-crime organization. It is an establishment protecting organization. There's been a lot of conversation about IRS audits and all of these kinds of things. What a lot of left activists have been arguing for very, very many years. It's not the just abstraction that cops are bad and law enforcement is bad and all of these things, but that these agencies are generally created and designed to protect the status quo, to protect elites, to police disproportionately in certain kind of areas, in certain kind of communities, to create a mass incarceration crisis, to put people in jail who are politically inconvenient, who you don't want to be at the polls, etc. That is the concern that we've been having for a really long time, and I'm just hopeful that this moment offers an opportunity for conservatives to understand that this isn't some culture war battle where my dad's a cop and I like him, and you hate my dad because he's a cop. No, it's not about these kind of interpersonal disputes. It's about whether these systems are being optimally designed to protect our broader American community.
Right, and that these systems are not sufficiently responsive to political forces and thus democratic incentives. That these are institutions, these are bureaucratic institutions that grow on their own, and that have interests and forces and powers at work within them that are not being directed by the representatives and thus by the people, but by their own initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we've got some updates on gas prices coming up next, so stick around.